Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 27 of the Bible by the Week. We are this week going over Second Chronicles, Second Kings. We'll look at the prophet Obadiah and a couple of Psalms, which could be dated to this period. And if you are like me, at this point, you are getting totally confused and overwhelmed by these various kings of Israel and Judah. So what I found helpful to do was to create a scorecard. That is to list out as I went the kings of Israel, the kings of Judah. When it was one united kingdom, it was easy. There was Saul, there was David, there was Solomon, but then the kingdom splits and you've got to keep track of them, especially when some of them have relatively short reigns. And the pattern in Kings and Chronicles is kind of repetitive with stories that are kind of distracting in between. And it gets even more confusing when you start throwing prophets into the list. So we've got Elijah and Elisha so far, but this week we add Obadiah. And as we go, we're going to add a bunch of prophets who spoke to these various kings, and it's going to get really overwhelming. So what I did was I created a scorecard comparing the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah, and then trying to match the prophets who spoke to these kings as they went along, just to kind of keep track. And if you're able to do that, what I want to suggest to you is the big picture, the pattern that emerges. And there are a couple of features of this pattern. First of all, both nations have good kings, that is, those who follow the true God, and bad kings. But for the most part, Israel has bad kings, those who worship false gods and depart from the true God. And Judah has a mixture. It has more good kings who are reformers, who worship the true God, maybe not completely, but they destroy the idols during their reign before the next king comes along and flips that. And when you compare the length of their reigns, together or individually, you discover a pattern. Those who followed God tended to reign longer. And because Judah, the southern kingdom, had more kings who followed the true God, what you discovered is the nation of Judah lasts a lot longer than the nation of Israel. Now, this is especially striking because both nations have 20 kings that are recorded in Kings and Chronicles. It's the same number of kings, but the southern kingdom of Judah lasts quite a bit longer. So if you look at a scorecard of the two, what you discover is that the nation of Israel, the northern kingdom, made up of the 10 tribes who rejected the reign of Rehoboam and went with Jeroboam, they are defeated by Assyria, conquered, and sent into exile around 722 BC. Whereas the nation of Judah, the southern kingdom, which has more kings who follow the true God, they last until 586 BC. And remember, we're counting down backwards to the age of Christ. So that's a significant difference, 150 years or so longer in the nation of Judah. And this is something that, looking at this big picture, shows us is that the kings who follow the true God tend to preserve their nation, not just in individual instances, but over the long scale of history. And you'll also notice the way that they die. The ones in Judah who follow the true God have a tendency to have a number of kings who die of natural causes, whereas those in Israel, again and again, they are assassinated and replaced, or they die in some terrible condition. So this is important to keep track of. Also, what you find is that as time goes on, there are more and more prophets that God sends to try to warn the nations not to turn away from him. So it starts out with Elijah and Elisha, but then we get into Jonah and Amos and Hosea, and possibly Obadiah is introduced early on. But eventually you get more and more prophets warning the nations what's going to happen if they don't turn back to the true God. And then we have this long gap called the intertestamental period between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and finally Jesus comes. So that's the big picture. If you're feeling confused or overwhelmed at this point, be of good cheer. You're not alone. But the reason that we're doing this is to see the big picture of history. We're not digging too deeply into any one king or story or verse at this point. We're just looking at the big pattern. So let's take a look at the readings for this week that we have read in Second Chronicles, which again is kind of one-sided. It really focuses on Judah. We have a prophet called Jehu who rebukes King Jehoshaphat because he sides with the evil king Ahab. You might remember Ahab as the one who was a nemesis, along with his wife Jezebel, of the prophet Elijah. They were big Baal worshipers, opposed to the true God and his prophet Elijah. And Elijah was overwhelmed, so he had Elisha. God provided Elisha as his assistant and apprentice. And another prophet who we don't know much about, but Jehu, he rebukes King Jehoshaphat. And Jehoshaphat actually has some good qualities. He reforms the justice system in Judah. When Ammon and Moab attack Judah, Jehoshaphat prays for victory and the Lord delivers them. That is, he does what God wants the kings to do, which is trust in him. He is succeeded, though, by Jehoram, who kills off his brothers and marries Ahab's daughter to consolidate his reign. And he walks in the ways of the evil kings of Israel. This is an idiom in Hebrew, especially in the Old Testament, to walk in the ways of Psalm 1 talks about not walking in the ways of the wicked. But that's what Joram does. Jehoram walks in the ways of the wicked kings of Israel, his in-laws. Judah, we're told, is spared for David's sake, but Jehoram dies of a terrible disease, and there's this great quote in Chronicle, to no one's regret, he dies. His son, Ahaziah, succeeds him, but he is also evil. He's executed when Jehu of Israel destroys the family of King Ahab. Ahaziah's mother, Athaliah, reigns as queen of Judah. I don't know if you knew that there is a queen. She's not mentioned in the book of Kings, but she is in Chronicles. She kills off all her rivals, but there is a good priest who hides a young prince, just a baby named Joash, and he hides him for 6 years along with his wife, who is the daughter of Jehoram. And 6 years later, he gathers all the Levites, the church workers, and the leaders of the various clans and anoints 7-year-old Joash as the rightful king of Judah. And Athaliah, the evil queen, is executed. Now, the priest Jehoiada, who had preserved Joash, he encourages Joash to make some reforms. So he ends up being a good king in that way. He repairs the temple, which has fallen into disrepair, and he funds it by taxes, which won't necessarily be popular. But when Jehoiada dies, and he lives to a good old age, 130 years old, Joash, his new counselors, lead him into idolatry, into worship of false gods. He is a better king than those who went before him, but he's not a strong king. And so his son, Zechariah, denounces him, and his son is killed for it. As Jesus said, many of the prophets were actually killed by the people of Israel. And then Joash himself is assassinated. He's succeeded by Amaziah as king of Judah, and Amaziah does what is right. And yet, Chronicles says, not with a whole heart. He spares the children of his father's murderers in accordance with the law of Moses. He musters some 300,000 Judean troops and hires another 100,000 from Israel. When his kingdom is threatened, but then he follows the advice of a man of God, think prophet or seer, and he trusts the Lord instead. He sends the Israelites home, and he ends up defeating the kingdom of Seir, killing 20,000 of their men, and so he is saved. But then he turns back and worships false gods, the idols. When Amaziah challenges Joash of Israel. Different Joash. Judah is defeated, and Jerusalem is plundered, and he flees to Lachish. Again, the lesson in Chronicles very strongly, even just illustrating with the history of Judah, is follow the true God. Trust him. Don't trust in the power of your armies or your political alliances. Now, Second Kings contains the history of both the kings of Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom. So, covering some of the same history, Ahaziah is injured in a fall, and he's denounced by Elijah. We're going back in time a little here, but for inquiring of Beelzebub. You might remember from the book, The Lord of the Flies, that's what Beelzebub means. It means the Lord of the Flies, or the Lord of the Dung Heap. It's a name for Baal, the false god, instead of the Lord. Sometimes it's used of Satan, too, in the New Testament. He dies, and Jehoram reigns wickedly in Israel. Elisha sticks with Elijah as they cross the Jordan River on dry land, again repeating the miracle that's done for Moses and that's done for the children of Israel, to prove that Moses' rightful successor is Joshua. And again, the power of God is shown that Elijah is in the spirit of these great leaders. And then he sticks with Elijah as much as he can, but you might remember famously, Elijah is finally taken to heaven in a chariot of fire. And Elisha performs miracles to show that he has been granted the power of Elijah. And those miracles include the fact that when a group of youths make fun of him because he's bald, the Lord sends a bear who attacks these youth, proving that baldness is no joke, or at least mocking a prophet, a spokesperson of God, is no joke. In 2 Kings, we find out, this is chapter 3, Moab rebels against evil Israel, but because Judah joins Israel, God provides water and a promised victory. Again, he's on the side of his people, specifically the people of Judah. Elisha provides oil to save a prophet's widow, just like Elijah did when there was this famine, we remember. And he provides a son for one of his supporters who is barren. When that son dies, Elisha raises him back to life, again showing that he has been given the power that God had given to Elijah. He also purifies a deadly stew that was poisoned, that could have killed his prophetic followers. Then there's an interesting story. He multiplies bread. Who else has multiplied bread? Well, predating Jesus. And there's an interesting story in which Naaman, who is a Syrian, one of the enemies of Israel and Judah, he has leprosy. But one of his servant girls tells him about Elisha. This is an Israelite servant girl. And so he goes to Israel's king and tries to buy healing. But of course, the true prophets of God and Israel's kings are not necessarily in league with each other. When Naaman comes and finds Elisha, he disappoints Naaman. He doesn't even go out. He says, yeah, tell that guy, go wash in the nearby river. And he's disappointed because he expects some grand miracle. He expects to be greeted. He has the entitlement, which would be the case with a great military commander, then as now. And but his servant says, my lord, if you had been told to do some great thing for this healing, wouldn't you have done it? How much more so to go bathe in this river? And Naaman's grumbling. He says, aren't the rivers where we come from even better? But he goes and washes in the river, and 7 times in the Jordan, and he is healed of his leprosy. Now, he comes and he wants to pay Elisha. Elisha refuses to accept payment for this healing. That's not why he did it. He did it to prove the power of God. But as Naaman is leaving, Elisha's servant, Gehazi, catches up to him and says, Naaman, oh, my master changed his mind. He's got guests coming. Can you provide some money so that he can entertain these? So Naaman does so. And because of this fraud and this misrepresentation, this blasphemy, Gehazi himself becomes leprous, showing the justice of God. There are a couple other stories of Elisha's miracles here in Second Kings. There's somebody has borrowed an axe. Axe head, the head flies off and sinks in the river. He can't find it, and this is a very valuable implement. The prophets don't have much, and yet Elisha allows this man to find it by floating this axe head out of the river. And he also warns Israel's king about the Syrians who are going to trap him. So when the Syrians come to capture Elisha because he's given this warning, much to the dismay of his servant, God opens up the servant's eyes to see the army of God, which is invisible normally to our eyes. And he blinds the Syrians so that they fail. And Elisha leads them to Samaria, which is the capital of Israel. And instead of being killed, they're feasted there. I mean, it's just some crazy stuff, the way God wants to show his people that he doesn't work the way that we work. And later, the Syrian king, Ben-Hadad is his name, besieges Samaria, and this produces a famine, which Israel's king blames Elisha for it. Remember, Elijah had summoned this famine on behalf of God earlier. And Elisha predicts that in one day, the whole situation is going to be reversed. And the next day, 4 lepers the foreign army is not going to get close to them. They go out and they discover that the Syrian army has fled. They have just left their camp and gone. And Elisha had predicted that the Israelites would actually plunder the Syrians. And sure enough, they go out, and the Syrian army has fled so quickly that they go out and they plunder the Syrians who are gone. And one of the captains who doubts this would happen, he actually dies. He doesn't even live to see it. And then a Shunammite, who had sheltered Elijah, has her land taken away, but through his influence, she gets it back, showing the justice of God, his care for the vulnerable. Then we're up to chapter 8. Let me see. Ben-Hadad's servant, Hazael, tries to kill him, and does, and becomes king of Syria, another replacement by assassination. Ahaziah of Judah goes out with Joram of Israel to fight Hazael, but Joram is wounded in the battle. Elisha anoints Jehu to be king of Israel to wipe out Ahab's house. Remember, Ahab was that wicked king in the north, and Elijah had predicted that his whole house would be wiped out. And Jehu, this commander, assassinates Joram, and he's wounded. And hold on, I'm getting confused here. Jehu assassinates Joram and Ahaziah, and he throws Joram's body into Naboth's land. Remember, Naboth was the guy who owned the vineyard in Samaria that was stolen by King Ahab. And he throws this descendant of Ahab onto that land rather than burying him, and kind of showing the end of Ahab's house. And he, when he comes back to the capital, Jezebel, remember the wicked queen, she gets pushed out of a window by her servants who hate her, dies in that fall, and her body is just left there, which is this terrible disgrace, and the dogs eat her flesh, which again was predicted by Elijah, though nobody could anticipate that would actually come true unless they trusted in God. It's just this unthinkable thing. Jehu has the 70 sons of Ahab, kings. Yes, they did that kind of thing. And 42 relatives of Ahaziah, has them all killed, and we're told out of zeal for the Lord. I know some of you think that this is just, so bloody, and that's because I think you have the assumption, being modern Americans, that things were basically peaceful, that, if it's not mentioned in the Bible, everybody was really nice to each other. And these Israelites are led by God to be so destructive. That is not the situation. It's just that we don't have, the Bible doesn't give us the context that history and archaeology give us, that war was the rule, not the exception. People were wicked, and they were incredibly violent. And in fact, that when the Bible says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, it's putting a limit on the type of revenge that was the norm. So yes, these stories are violent, but remember, so are the people who are receiving for their evil actions what they have many times over given to their enemies. And it was the law of Moses, remember, to have pity on the children of your enemy. So this is not necessarily what God prescribed. It's just describing this is what happens. So let me see, where were we here? The Jehu has these relatives, these descendants of Ahab, killed out of zeal for the Lord. He's got to uproot this cancer of Baal worship, and he slaughters the priests of Baal and makes their temple into a latrine to desecrate this false god. But he's not entirely careful to follow the Lord. Ahaziah's mother, Athaliah, I remember the queen that was mentioned earlier, she kills her family and makes herself queen. But Jehoiada the priest, as we were told, hides Joash, later has him crowned king and the queen killed. He renews God's covenant, and he tears down the altars to Baal. Jehoash, who's also known as Joash, follows, and he reigns rightly for 40 years. He repairs the temple, right? Doesn't tear down the high places. Remember, the high places are where the false gods are worshipped. Jerusalem is where the true God is worshipped, only on Mount Zion. And he pays tribute to Syria. He doesn't entirely trust God, right? But he's still way better than the kings before him. And so he lives a lot longer. 40 years was a long reign given the other kings and what happened to them. Jehoahaz succeeds Jehu in Israel and does evil, but he does turn to God when he's oppressed by Syria. If you're keeping track of these kings, what I would put a negative behind those that act badly, that don't follow God, and a positive behind those that do. And sometimes it was a positive. They started good, and then negative because they fell away from God. Sometimes it's a negative. They started badly, but then a positive because they turned back to God. And that's the case with Jehoash. And he's given a sign that he'll defeat Syria when he visits the dying Elisha. And one of the signs of Elisha is after he dies, his bones, we're told, actually revive a dead man. Even in the prophet's bones, it's shown that God is with them. Chapter 14, Amaziah succeeds Joash in Judah. He reigns rightly, but he gets cocky after he defeats Edom, and he decides to take on Israel. And Israel defeats him, and they end up plundering Jerusalem. And remember, this is Israel. These are the brothers of the Judahites that are plundering Jerusalem, their capital, and they exact tribute from Judah. And then Jeroboam II succeeds Jehoash, and he does evil, yet he's given the power to restore Israel's borders. So that's our reading of the Kings for this week. Along with that reading was the prophet Obadiah. We are not entirely sure when Obadiah wrote, but on the theory that he was one of the early prophets, he warns Edom that it will be destroyed for its violence against its brother nation Israel. Remember, Edom, those are the descendants of Esau, the brother of Jacob, who's also known as Israel. So these are relatives of the Israelites, and yet they act violently towards Israel, and they're warned. And the reason we're not sure, there's no date in this book, and there are two times that we know of when Edom was punished by military defeats for its violence towards Israel, and one of those times is early on during the history that we just read about. So on that theory, Obadiah is early. And then there are two psalms thrown in this week: Psalm 82, in which God is called on to judge the oppressors, and 83, where those oppressors are named as Edom, Moab, Ammon, and Philistia. And they are included here because those happen to be the foreign nations that oppressed the nations of Israel and Judah during this time period. So I'm sure you're completely overwhelmed now, as I am. You can tell I'm kind of stammering around a little bit. I just encourage you to step back, see the big picture, that in the long run, even though the prophets of God are often killed, in the long run, faithfulness to God is rewarded, and God does not forget his people, his promises to Abraham and to David. Even when the people rebel, he's constantly calling on them to turn back. And that's the big picture. So I hope that this wasn't too much for you this week, that you enjoyed the readings, what there was to enjoy of it, and that you keep at it. We'll have more of the Kings next week.